The signal had been dead for 47 years. That was what the records said, and the records were never wrong. Colony Vega 7, established in the outer reaches of the Terran expansion zone, had gone silent without warning, without distress call, without explanation. The Galactic Council had marked it as lost. The alien observers had documented another human failure, and the stars had moved on without caring. Commander Marcus Webb stood at the helm of the reclamation vessel Persistence, staring at the data screen that showed the planet growing larger in the viewport. He was 53 years old, with gray threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes from decades of staring into the void. He had volunteered for this mission when no one else would take it. "Approaching orbital insertion in 20 minutes, said Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka from the navigation console. She was young, barely 30, and had joined the mission because she believed in second chances. Her grandmother had been born on a colony ship, and she understood what it meant to build something from nothing. "Understood," Marcus replied. He turned to look at the crew assembled on the bridge. 12 people. That was all Earth Command had given him. 12 people to investigate a dead colony and determine if it could be saved. The Velnoxy ambassador had laughed when the mission was announced. The sound had echoed through the chambers of the Galactic Council, a musical trill that their species used to express amusement at lesser beings. The Velnoxy were ancient, their civilization spanning 30,000 years, and they had watched humanity stumble into the stars like children learning to walk. "Another waste of resources," Ambassador Threx had declared. "The humans cannot accept that some failures are permanent. Their colony died because they were not ready for expansion. Now they send 12 individuals to mourn at a grave." Marcus had been present at that meeting. He had said nothing because there was nothing to say. The Velnoxy were not wrong about human history. Vega 7 had been humanity's third attempt at establishing a self-sustaining colony beyond the solar system, and it had followed the same pattern as the first two: expansion, struggle, silence. The other species in the council had come to expect it. But Marcus knew something the Velnoxy did not understand. He knew what humans did when they were told something was impossible. "Commander," said Dr. Eliza Chen from the science station. She was the mission's lead analyst, a woman in her 40s who had spent her entire career studying failed colonies. "I'm picking up energy readings from the surface." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. What kind of energy readings? "Low-level power generation, consistent with emergency systems." Eliza's fingers moved across her console, pulling up data streams. "There's also atmospheric processing still active in sectors 12 through 18. "That's impossible," said Lieutenant Tanaka. "The colony has been dead for nearly 50 years. Nothing should still be running." "Humans build things to last," Marcus said quietly, "even when we don't expect them to." The Persistence slid into orbit around Vega 7, and the crew began their scans. What they found changed everything. The colony had not died. It had survived barely, holding on through decades of isolation with failing equipment and diminishing resources. The population had dropped from 15,000 to just under 300, but those 300 were still there, still breathing, still fighting to exist. "They're alive," Eliza whispered, staring at her screen. "After 47 years, they're still alive." Marcus activated the communication system. "Colony Vega 7, this is Reclamation Vessel Persistence from Earth Command. Do you copy?" Static filled the bridge for several long seconds. Then a voice came through, rough and tired but unmistakably human. "Persistence, this is Vega 7 Central, we copy." There was a pause, and when the voice continued, it cracked with emotion. "We thought you forgot about us." "Never," Marcus replied. "We're coming down." The shuttle landed on what had once been the main landing pad, now cracked and overgrown with local vegetation that the colonists had never fully understood. Marcus was the first to step out, followed by his crew. They carried supplies, medicine, equipment, and something more important than all of those things combined. They carried hope. The colonists who came to meet them were thin and weathered, their clothes patched dozens of times, their faces marked by years of hardship. But they stood straight, and they looked at the newcomers with eyes that still held fire. A woman stepped forward from the group. She was old, perhaps 70, with white hair pulled back in a tight braid and hands that showed the calluses of constant work. "I'm Governor Helena Voss," she said, "third governor of Vega 7. I was 18 when the silence began." Marcus extended his hand, and she took it with a grip that surprised him with its strength. "Commander Marcus Webb, we're here to help you rebuild." Helena studied him for a long moment. "The council said we were dead. They said our colony was a failure that proved humans weren't ready for expansion. Why did you come?" "Because the council was wrong," Marcus said simply, "and because humans don't abandon each other." The story of Vega 7's survival was one of impossible determination. When the communication systems failed, the colonists had tried everything to restore them. When that failed, they had focused on survival. The terraforming equipment broke down piece by piece, and they learned to fix it with whatever they could find. The food production systems collapsed, and they developed new methods of farming that worked with the alien soil. People died from diseases they couldn't cure, from accidents they couldn't prevent, from despair they couldn't escape. But always, some of them kept going. "My mother was the first governor," Helena explained as she led Marcus through the colony's central hub. The building was scarred and patched, but it was standing. "She told us that help would come. She said that humans never really give up on each other, no matter how far apart we are. She died believing that." "She was right," Marcus said. Helena stopped walking and turned to face him. "Was she? 47 years, Commander. 47 years of silence. Children were born and grew old without ever hearing from Earth. We started to think we had been erased from history." "You weren't erased. You were," Marcus searched for the right words. "You were lost, and finding lost things takes time, but we never stopped looking. There have been recovery missions sent to every failed colony searching for survivors. You're the first we've found." Helena's expression shifted, something in her eyes softening. "And when you found nothing at the others?" "We learned, we improved our search methods, we kept trying." Marcus put a hand on her shoulder. "That's what humans do. We fail and we try again. We lose and we refuse to accept it. The Velnoxi think that makes us foolish. Maybe it does, but it also brought us here." The other colonists had gathered around them, listening. Marcus saw faces of all ages, from children who had been born in isolation to elders who remembered Earth as more than just stories. They looked at him and his crew like they were something out of legend. "What happens now?" asked a young man near the front of the crowd. He couldn't have been more than 20, which meant he had never known any life but this one. Marcus turned to address them all. "Now we rebuild. We've brought supplies to stabilize your systems and establish communication with Earth. More ships will follow with additional resources and personnel. But most importantly, we're here to learn from you." "Learn from us?" Helena asked, surprise clear in her voice. "You survived conditions that should have killed you. You maintained a functioning society for nearly 5 decades without external support. The Galactic Council said that was impossible." Marcus smiled. "I want to know how you did it so we can make sure no other colony ever faces what you faced. Your experience is invaluable." For the first time, Helena smiled back. It transformed her face, erasing years of hardship and revealing the young woman she must have been when the world fell silent around her. "Then welcome to Vega 7, Commander. We have a lot of stories to tell." The news of Vega 7's survival reached Earth within days, transmitted through the newly restored communication arrays. From there, it spread to every human settlement in the galaxy, and from there to the Galactic Council itself. Ambassador Threx received the report in his private chambers, reading through the data with increasing disbelief. 300 survivors, 47 years of isolation, a colony that had refused to die despite every obstacle the universe had thrown at it. He called an emergency session of the council. "This changes nothing," Threx declared to the assembled representatives. "A handful of humans survived on a failing world. It is remarkable, perhaps, but it does not alter the fundamental truth. Human colonies are unstable. Their expansion is reckless and unsustainable." The human representative, a woman named Director Amara Obi, rose from her seat. "With respect, Ambassador, it changes everything. The Council declared Vega 7 dead. You personally stated that our colony failed because we were not ready for expansion. You were wrong. One anomaly does not create a pattern." "No," Amara agreed, "but it does create a possibility, and possibilities are what humans do best." The debate continued for hours, but Marcus Webb did not watch the recordings. He was too busy working alongside the colonists of Vega 7, learning their methods and sharing his own, building something that would last. Because that was what humans did. They built, and they failed, and they built again. They refused to accept that anything was truly lost, and sometimes, just sometimes, they were rewarded for their stubborn, impossible hope. The stars watched, as they always did, and somewhere in the depths of space, other lost colonies waited to be found. The rebuilding of Vega 7 began in the early hours of the first morning after the Persistence arrived. Marcus had not slept. Neither had most of his crew, and certainly not the colonists who had spent decades dreaming of this moment. There was too much work to be done, too much ground to cover, and too much hope filling every corner of the settlement to waste time on rest. Dr. Eliza Chen set up her portable laboratory in what had once been the colony's medical center. The equipment inside was outdated by Earth standards, cobbled together from spare parts and pure determination. She found surgical tools that had been reforged from kitchen implements, diagnostic machines held together with wire and prayer, and a complete set of medical records maintained on paper because the digital systems had failed 30 years ago. "This is incredible," she said to the elderly man who served as the colony's only doctor. His name was Samuel Ortiz, and he was 74 years old. He had been a medical student when the communications died, halfway through his training with no way to complete it. He had learned the rest from trial and error, from the medical texts that had been stored in the colony's original database before it crashed, from watching people live and die under his imperfect care. "It's what we had to work with," Samuel replied. His voice was matter-of-fact without pride or shame. "We lost a lot of people in the early years because I didn't know what I was doing, but I got better. You have to get better or you have to give up. We don't give up here." Eliza looked at the makeshift defibrillator on the shelf, constructed from parts of a broken ground vehicle and some wiring from the atmospheric processors. "Does this actually work?" "Saved 12 lives over the years." Samuel picked it up and showed her the modifications he had made. "The charge isn't as precise as a proper medical model, but it delivers enough to restart a heart if you time it right. I had to learn the timing the hard way." Eliza began documenting everything she saw, recording Samuel's innovations and the techniques he had developed. This knowledge needed to be preserved, shared with other colonies, integrated into training programs. The things these people had learned through necessity could save countless lives elsewhere. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Tanaka was working with the colony's engineers to assess the state of the critical infrastructure. The atmospheric processors were their first priority, because without breathable air, nothing else mattered. The lead engineer was a woman named Rosa Delgado, 42 years old, who had grown up with machines that were always breaking and never had the right parts to fix them. She walked Tanaka through the processor facility, pointing out the modifications and workarounds that kept the systems running. "This unit should have failed completely about 20 years ago," Rosa explained, gesturing at a massive filtration assembly that hummed and clicked with sounds no properly functioning machine should make. The primary filters degraded, and we couldn't manufacture replacements. So we developed a secondary filtration method using processed biological material from the local plants. Tanaka stared at the system, trying to understand what she was seeing. You're filtering the air through plant matter. Partially decomposed plant matter, specifically. It has chemical properties that bind with the contaminants we couldn't remove otherwise. Rosa shrugged. It took us 3 years to figure it out. We lost about 100 people to respiratory complications before we got it working. I'm sorry. Don't be. They knew the risks and they chose to stay anyway. We all did. Rosa looked at the machine with something like affection. This ugly thing is the reason the rest of us are still breathing. I've spent half my life keeping it running. I know every bolt, every wire, every strange sound it makes. Tanaka made notes, recorded footage, and asked questions. The engineering solutions that Vega 7 had developed were unconventional, often dangerous, and sometimes brilliant. They represented a different approach to survival than anything taught in the academy, an approach born from desperation and refined through painful experience. In the colony's central administration building, Marcus met with Governor Helena Voss and her advisory council. They gathered in a room that had once been a conference center, now serving as the heart of the colony's governance. The table in the center was scarred and stained, its surface marked by years of difficult decisions and desperate planning. We need to discuss what comes next, Helena said. She sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the 5 people who helped her lead the colony. They were all older, all survivors of the original crisis, all carrying the weight of responsibility that had never truly lifted. Marcus nodded. Earth Command is preparing additional support vessels. We can have a full relief mission here within 3 months, bringing supplies, personnel, and equipment to stabilize your situation. And then what? Asked one of the council members, a man named Victor Chen who had served as the colony's chief of security for 30 years. We've been on our own for so long. I'm not sure we know how to be part of something larger anymore. That's understandable, Marcus replied. You've developed your own systems, your own culture, your own way of doing things. No one is going to come in and tear that down. The relief mission is support, not replacement. We're here to help you, not to take over. Helena leaned forward, her eyes sharp. But there will be integration eventually. We can't remain isolated forever, not if we want to truly survive. Our population is too small, our gene pool too limited. We need new people, new resources, new connections. All of that can be arranged, on your terms and at your pace. The decision about how Vega 7 moves forward will be made by you, not by Earth Command. That's a generous offer, Commander, but I've been governing long enough to know that integration is never that simple. There will be people who want to take what we've built and reshape it to match their expectations. There will be officials who think they know better than we do how to run our lives. Marcus held her gaze. There probably will be, but you've proven that you can survive anything. A few bureaucrats shouldn't be a problem. For a moment the room was silent. Then Victor Chen let out a rough laugh and the tension broke. He's got a point, Helena. We survived atmospheric contamination, plague, crop failure, and 17 attempted coups. Earth administrators might actually be easier to handle. Helena smiled slightly. 17 coups is a bit of an exaggeration. 15 then. I may have miscounted during the food riots. The council meeting continued, shifting from high-level concerns to practical details. They discussed supply priorities, personnel needs, communication schedules, and the dozens of other elements required to bring Vega 7 back into contact with the rest of humanity. Outside the administration building, the colonists were already working alongside the Persistence crew. They moved with purpose, showing the newcomers the systems that kept them alive and learning about the technologies that had been developed during their decades of isolation. A group of children followed Dr. Chen around, fascinated by her equipment and eager to ask questions about Earth. Most of them had never seen anyone from beyond their colony. To them, the Persistence crew might as well have been visitors from mythology. "Is it true that Earth has oceans?" asked a girl who couldn't have been more than 10. Her name was Esperanza, and she had been born in the colony's underground hospital during a power failure. Eliza knelt down to her level. "Yes, it's true. Earth has many oceans covering most of the planet." "What do they look like?" Eliza thought for a moment. "Imagine looking at the sky, but instead of being above you, it's all around you, and it moves and changes constantly. That's what the ocean is like, blue and endless." Esperanza's eyes went wide. "I want to see that someday." "Maybe you will. With the communications restored, there will be opportunities for travel, for education, for all kinds of things that weren't possible before." The girl nodded solemnly, then ran off to share this information with her friends. Eliza watched her go, thinking about all the children who had grown up on Vega 7 knowing nothing but struggle and isolation. They deserved more, and now they might actually get it. As the first day turned into the second, and the second into the third, patterns began to emerge. The Persistence crew worked in shifts, maintaining contact with Earth while also contributing to the colony's daily operations. The colonists, initially wary of the newcomers, began to open up, sharing stories and knowledge that had been preserved through generations. Marcus found himself spending more time with Helena, learning about the history that had unfolded during the decades of silence. She told him about the early years, when hope still ran high, and everyone believed that rescue was just around the corner. She told him about the dark period that followed, when the colony nearly tore itself apart as factions fought over dwindling resources. She told him about the eventual stabilization, the hard-won peace that came from realizing that they had to work together or die separately. "We're not the same people we were before the silence," Helena said one evening as they walked through the colony's central garden. The garden was small, just a few dozen square meters of carefully cultivated plants, but it was the colony's pride. "The crisis changed us, forced us to become something different. Whether that's better or worse, I honestly don't know." "Different isn't always worse," Marcus replied. "You develop solutions that Earth never considered, built a society that functions under conditions we thought were impossible. That has value. Maybe, or maybe we're just survivors, holding on until we became too stubborn to die." Helena stopped beside a flowering plant, reaching out to touch its petals gently. "This is a hybrid. We developed it from Earth seeds and local genetics. It took 20 years of experimentation, but we finally created something that could grow in our soil without extensive terraforming. The flowers are beautiful, but they taste terrible." Marcus laughed. "Sometimes that's the trade-off." "Yes, sometimes it is." The news broadcasts from Earth continued to arrive, carrying reports of the Galactic Council's reaction to Vega 7's survival. The Velnoxy had grudgingly acknowledged that their assessment had been premature, though they maintained that one successful colony recovery did not invalidate their broader concerns about human expansion. Other species were more interested, particularly the Meridani, who had their own history of failed colonies and were curious about the techniques Vega 7 had developed. Director Amara Obi was handling the political situation with skill and determination, using the colony's survival as evidence of humanity's resilience and adaptability. She pushed for increased support for exploration and colonization programs, arguing that what Vega 7 had achieved could be replicated and improved upon. "We are not a species that gives up," she declared in one address to the council. "We are a species that learns from our mistakes and comes back stronger. Every failure teaches us something. Every loss makes us more determined. That is not a weakness. That is our greatest strength." On Vega 7, the work continued. The atmospheric processors were stabilized, the communication arrays were fully restored, and the first cargo shipments from Earth began arriving ahead of schedule. Each delivery brought supplies, But more importantly, it brought messages. Letters from family members who had given up hope, greetings from complete strangers who had been inspired by the colony's story, official communications from governments and institutions across human space. The colonists read these messages with tears in their eyes, overwhelmed by the realization that they had not been forgotten, that their struggle had been witnessed and honored. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Marcus began thinking about the next step. Vega 7 was not the only colony that had been written off. There were others out there, silent and presumed dead, waiting to be found. The humans were just getting started. 3 months after the Persistence first made contact with Vega 7, the colony had transformed. Not entirely, not completely, but enough to make the difference between survival and actual living visible to anyone who looked. The atmospheric processors ran smoothly now, supported by replacement parts and improved filtration systems. The food production facilities had been expanded, integrating the colonists' innovative techniques with modern technology brought from Earth. The medical center had become a proper hospital, staffed by Dr. Ortiz and 3 new physicians who had volunteered for long-term assignment. But the most significant changes were harder to measure. They showed in the way people walked, the way they talked, the way they looked at the sky without the weight of absolute isolation pressing down on them. Marcus stood in the colony's newly restored observation deck, watching the stars through windows that had been cracked and patched for decades. They had been replaced now with proper transparent alloy, clear and strong, a small symbol of the larger changes taking place. "You look like a man with something on his mind," Helena said, joining him at the window. She had grown accustomed to finding him here in the quiet hours, staring out at the darkness. "I've received orders from Earth Command," Marcus replied. He didn't turn to look at her. "The Persistence is being reassigned to another recovery mission." "Yes, Colony Tau Ceti 4. It went silent 31 years ago. The Council wrote it off as a complete loss, but after what happened here, they're reconsidering." Helena was quiet for a moment. "Do you think there are survivors?" "I don't know. The circumstances were different, the colony was smaller, the planet was harsher, but we didn't think there were survivors here either." Finally, Marcus turned to face her. "That's the point, isn't it? We didn't think you could survive, and you did. We didn't think you could build a functioning society out of ruins, and you did. The things we think are impossible keep turning out to be wrong. Only because people refuse to accept them as impossible." Helena moved to stand beside him at the window, their reflections overlapping in the glass. "That's not magic, Marcus. That's just stubbornness." "Stubbornness is underrated. The Velnoxi call it foolishness. They say we waste resources on lost causes, that we should accept failure and move on to more productive endeavors." "What do you call it?" Marcus smiled slightly. "I call it being human. We don't accept that things are over until we've seen them end ourselves. Sometimes that means we fight when we should surrender or hope when we should despair. But sometimes, just often enough to matter, it means we find what everyone else gave up looking for." The news of the expanded recovery program had spread throughout human space, generating both enthusiasm and controversy. Critics argued that the resources would be better spent on new colonies rather than searching for survivors of old ones. Supporters countered that no colony could truly succeed if its people believed that failure meant abandonment. The debate raged in political chambers, academic forums, and private conversations, but the missions went forward regardless. Earth Command had authorized 5 additional recovery vessels, each tasked with investigating a different silent colony. The Persistence would handle Tau Ceti 4, while other ships traveled to Beta Hydrae 2, Epsilon Eridani 7, and the 2 inner colonies of the Kepler system. It was the largest coordinated recovery effort in human history. "You're actually going to do this," Lieutenant Tanaka said when Marcus briefed the crew on their new assignment. "Leave a colony we know is alive to search for one that's probably dead." Dr. Ortiz has the medical situation under control. Rosa and her team can handle the infrastructure. The relief personnel will be here within weeks. Marcus looked around the room at his crew, seeing the mixture of emotions on their faces. But Tau Ceti 4 has no one looking for them. If there are survivors, they've been alone for 3 decades. And if there aren't, then we'll know, and we'll learn whatever we can from what we find so that future colonies don't face the same fate. Marcus straightened. I won't order anyone to come with me. This is a volunteer mission, and if you want to stay here with Vega 7, I'll understand. But I'm going. No one stayed behind. The departure ceremony was simple and brief. The colonists gathered at the landing pad, watching as the Persistence crew loaded the last of their equipment and prepared for launch. Helena stood at the front of the crowd, her white hair bright in the afternoon sun. You changed everything, she said to Marcus as they stood apart from the others for a final conversation. A few months ago, we were the forgotten dead. Now we're part of something again, part of humanity. You were always part of humanity, Marcus replied. The rest of us just forgot for a while. You reminded us. What do you think you'll find at Tau Ceti 4? I don't know, maybe nothing, maybe another miracle. He extended his hand and she took it with that same strong grip she had offered on the first day. But I know what we'll bring with us. Everything you taught us. Every innovation, every adaptation, every technique you developed for survival. If there are people there, we'll have more to offer them than just supplies. Helena nodded slowly. Then don't waste it. Find them, Marcus. Find all of them. We will. The Persistence lifted off as the colony watched, rising through the atmosphere that had been tamed through decades of struggle and into the void that waited beyond. Through the viewport, Marcus watched Vega 7 shrink to a point of light, then disappear entirely as the ship oriented itself toward its new destination. The journey to Tau Ceti 4 would take 6 weeks. During that time, the crew reviewed everything they knew about the lost colony, studying records, analyzing data, and preparing for every scenario they could imagine. The colony had been established as a mining operation, intended to harvest rare minerals from a world that was barely habitable. It had been home to 8,000 people at its peak, mostly workers and their families. The silence had come suddenly, without warning. One day, the regular communications were transmitting normally. The next, nothing. Initial investigation had suggested a catastrophic system failure, possibly caused by volcanic activity that the surveys had failed to detect. The Council had declared the colony dead, and humanity had mourned and moved on. But now Marcus wondered, what if the surveys had been wrong? What if the colonists had found a way to survive, just as Vega 7 had? We're picking up something strange, Dr. Chen announced on the 35th day of the journey. She was monitoring the long-range sensors, looking for any sign of activity from their destination. There's a faint electromagnetic signature from the planetary surface, consistent with industrial power generation. Marcus felt the familiar surge of hope, tempered by experience. Can you pinpoint the source? Not precisely, but it's coming from the region where the main settlement was located. The readings are weak, intermittent, but they're definitely there. The crew exchanged glances. Weak and intermittent could mean a lot of things. It could be survivors running minimal systems to conserve power. It could be automated equipment still functioning after 3 decades without maintenance. It could be something else entirely, something they hadn't considered. Continue monitoring, Marcus ordered, and increase our sensor sensitivity. I want to know everything we can about that signal before we arrive. As the Persistence drew closer to Tau Ceti 4, the picture became clearer and more complicated. The electromagnetic signature was definitely artificial, but it didn't match any standard pattern for human technology. It was too irregular, too unpredictable, cycling through frequencies in ways that made no apparent sense. It could be damaged equipment operating erratically, Tanaka suggested during a crew meeting. After 30 years without proper maintenance, anything that's still running would be in pretty bad shape. Or it could be intentional, Chen countered. A signal pattern designed to be noticed by anyone approaching the planet, a beacon. Why not use a standard distress frequency? Because maybe they don't have access to standard equipment anymore. Maybe they had to improvise with whatever they had left. Marcus listened to the debate, weighing the possibilities. Everything they were seeing was consistent with the Vega 7 scenario, but also consistent with a dozen other explanations. They wouldn't know for certain until they got there. The Persistence entered orbit around Tau Ceti 4 on the 42nd day of the journey. From above, the planet looked hostile, dark clouds covering most of the surface, volcanic activity visible as glowing wounds in the crust, oceans that churned with contaminated water. The original colonists had known what they were getting into, accepting the harsh conditions in exchange for the mineral wealth that lay beneath the surface. "I'm detecting the signal source," Chen reported. "It's coming from the northern hemisphere, in a mountain range about 200 kilometers from where the main settlement was supposed to be. There are structures down there, Commander, artificial structures." "Put it on the main display." The image appeared on the screen, grainy and distorted by atmospheric interference but unmistakable. Buildings, carved into the side of a mountain, connected by tunnels and bridges that wound through the rock. Lights flickered in some of the windows, faint but present. And there, mounted on the highest point of the settlement, was the source of the electromagnetic signal. A makeshift antenna, cobbled together from what looked like mining equipment and salvage technology. "They're alive," Tanaka whispered. Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Open a channel, all frequencies." The communication system activated, sending a broad-spectrum signal toward the surface. "Colony Tau Ceti 4, this is Reclamation Vessel Persistence from Earth Command. We are receiving your signal. Do you copy?" Static, then more static, then finally a voice, rough and uncertain. "Earth Command, is this real? Are you really there?" "We're really here," Marcus replied. "We're coming down." The settlement was called Haven. The survivors had named it that after they fled the original colony, which had been destroyed not by volcanic activity, but by a catastrophic earthquake that the surveys had somehow missed. The quake had killed 5,000 people in the first hour, and the aftershocks had claimed another 1,000 before the survivors managed to evacuate. They had found refuge in the mountains, in caves that protected them from the planet's hostile environment. Over 3 decades, they had transformed those caves into a home, building structures and systems that allowed them to survive. Their population had dropped to just over 400, but they were alive. Marcus stood in the central chamber of Haven, surrounded by people who had given up hope of rescue years ago. Their leader was a man named Jonas Roth, who had been a young engineer when the earthquake struck. He had been one of the ones who figured out how to build the beacon. "We didn't think anyone would come," Jonas said, his voice thick with emotion. "After the first few years, we accepted that we were on our own, but we kept the beacon running anyway, just in case someone was still looking." "Someone was still looking," Marcus replied. "And there will be others. The recovery program is expanding. Every colony that went silent is being investigated. Every survivor will be found." Jonas stared at him, tears running down his weathered face. Why now after all this time? Marcus thought of Helena, of Vega 7, of the colonists who had refused to die. "Because we finally remembered who we are, and who we are is people who don't give up on each other." The news of Tau Ceti 4 survivors reached the Galactic Council 3 days later. The Velnoxy ambassador received the report in silence, reading through the data without the dismissive comments that had characterized his earlier responses. 2 colonies, decades silent, both found alive. The pattern was becoming harder to ignore. Director Amara Obi called for an emergency session. "This is not an anomaly," she declared to the assembled representatives. "This is who we are. We have found 2 colonies that the Council declared dead, and in both cases, the colonists survived through determination and innovation. We have now authorized investigations of every silent human settlement. We expect to find more survivors." "And if you do not," Threx asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Then we will honor those who were lost by learning from their mistakes. We will improve our technology, our preparation, our support systems. We will make sure that no future colony ever faces what these people faced." Amara's expression was fierce. "But we will not stop looking. We will never stop looking." The debate that followed would continue for weeks, reshaping humanity's position in the galactic community. But Marcus didn't hear any of it. He was too busy working with the survivors of Tau Ceti 4, helping them rebuild just as he had helped Vega 7. And already he was thinking about the next mission. Beta Hydrae 2 had gone silent 18 years ago. Epsilon Eridani 7, 23 years. The Kepler colonies, 15 and 19 years respectively. Out there somewhere, more survivors were waiting, more miracles waiting to be found. Marcus would find them all. The word spread through human space like wildfire. Tau Ceti 4 had survivors. Vega 7 had survivors. The impossible was becoming possible, and the implications rippled outward to every colony, every station, every settlement that had ever wondered what would happen if the worst came true. Earth Command established the Office of Colony Recovery, a permanent department dedicated to investigating silent colonies and supporting survivor populations. Volunteers flooded in, people from every background and walk of life who wanted to be part of the effort. Engineers, doctors, scientists, farmers, teachers, administrators, people who had skills to offer, and people who simply refused to accept that any human community should be left to die alone. Marcus Webb was promoted to Director of Field Operations, a position that put him in charge of all active recovery missions. He accepted the role reluctantly, preferring the hands-on work of leading individual missions to the administrative duties of overseeing dozens of them. But he understood the importance of coordination, of ensuring that lessons learned on one mission were applied to all the others. The recovery of Beta Hydrae 2 came 3 months after Tau Ceti 4. The colony there had been an agricultural settlement, established to grow food for the surrounding systems. When their communications failed, they had turned inward, developing self-sufficient farming techniques that allowed them to survive on a fraction of the resources they had originally needed. Their population had held steady at just under 500, and they emerged from their isolation with innovations in crop rotation and soil management that would revolutionize farming across human space. Epsilon Eridani 7 was harder. The colony had been a research station, home to scientists studying the unusual properties of the system's asteroid belt. Their situation had been more desperate than the others, their resources more limited, their population more fragile. When the recovery team arrived, they found only 83 survivors out of an original population of 1,200. But those 83 had maintained the research station's primary function, continuing to gather data and make discoveries even as they struggled to stay alive. Their findings, preserved in meticulous records, represented 2 decades of work that advanced humanity's understanding of asteroid formation and mineral distribution. The Kepler colonies were the most dramatic discoveries. Both had been located on moons orbiting a gas giant, and both had faced similar challenges when their communications were severed by a solar flare. Rather than struggling in isolation, the colonists had found each other, establishing contact through jury-rigged radio systems and coordinating their survival efforts. By the time the recovery teams arrived, the 2 colonies had effectively merged, sharing resources, personnel, and knowledge in ways that neither could have managed alone. Their combined population of 700 represented the largest survivor group yet discovered. Each recovery brought new lessons, new innovations, new techniques for survival. The Office of Colony Recovery compiled these into a growing database, sharing them with active colonies and using them to improve preparation for future settlements. The knowledge that had been born from desperation became a resource for preventing desperation, a transformation that seemed to Marcus like the essence of human progress. But the recoveries also brought challenges. Not every silent colony had survivors. The investigation of Proxima Centauri 3 found only ruins, the remnants of a settlement that had been wiped out by a pathogen that the colonists had never identified. The team documented everything they could, honoring the dead by understanding how they had fallen, and the findings led to new protocols for disease screening and quarantine that would protect future colonies. The Velnoxi observed all of this with growing uncertainty. Their civilization had existed for 30,000 years, and in that time, they had developed a clear understanding of how species succeeded or failed in the galactic community. Successful species planned carefully, avoided risks, and accepted losses as inevitable. They did not pour resources into recovering failed settlements. They did not treat survival as a challenge to be overcome rather than a state to be maintained. Humans, apparently, had not received this memo. "Your behavior defies logical analysis," Ambassador Threx told Director Obi during one of their regular meetings. His tone was less condescending than it had once been, replaced by something closer to genuine curiosity. "You have now recovered 7 colonies that we considered permanently lost. In doing so, you have expended resources that could have established 3 new settlements. How do you justify this allocation?" Amara smiled. "We don't justify it, Ambassador. We simply do it, because those people were out there waiting for help and we had the ability to provide that help. That's all the justification we need." But the efficiency, the mathematics of resource allocation, clearly favors investment in new colonies rather than recovery of old ones. Your approach is objectively suboptimal. Perhaps, but efficiency isn't our only value. We also value loyalty, perseverance, and the belief that no one should be abandoned. Those things can't be quantified, but they're real. They're part of what makes us who we are. Threx was silent for a long moment. "The Velnoxi have survived for 30 millennia by optimizing our decisions, by accepting losses and moving forward. Your species is barely 500 years into space travel. You may find that our approach serves you better in the long term. Or we may find that our approach creates something new, something that neither of our species has seen before. We won't know until we try." The ambassador made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something else entirely. "Your optimism is remarkable, Director. I find myself uncertain whether it is inspiring or terrifying." "Maybe it's both." Marcus watched the recording of this conversation later, sitting in his office at the Office of Colony Recovery headquarters on Earth. Outside his window, the lights of New Geneva glittered in the evening darkness, a city that had grown from nothing over the course of 3 centuries. Humanity had built this, just as they had built everything else, through stubbornness and hope, and the refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. His desk was covered with reports from active recovery missions, status updates from recovered colonies, and proposals for future operations. The work never stopped because there was always more to be done. More colonies to investigate, more survivors to find, more lessons to learn. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Helena Voss entered, looking out of place in the formal surroundings. She had traveled to Earth for the first time in her life, accepting an invitation to speak at the anniversary celebration of the Vega 7 recovery. At 72, she moved more slowly than she once had, but her eyes were still sharp. "I thought I might find you hiding from the party," she said, settling into a chair across from his desk. "I'm not hiding, I'm working." "Same thing in my experience." Helena looked around the office, taking in the displays and documents. "This is quite an operation you've built." "It's not mine. I just help coordinate it. The real work happens out there with the recovery teams and the survivors. Modest as always, Helena's expression softened. I've been watching the news broadcasts, reading the reports. You've found so many of them, Marcus. So many people who thought they were alone. Not enough. There are still colonies we haven't reached, still people waiting for help that may never come. There always will be. That's not failure. That's just the reality of working in a universe this large. Helena leaned forward. But you've changed something fundamental. You've proven that isolation isn't permanent, that failure isn't final. Every colony in human space knows now that if the worst happens, someone will come looking for them. That matters more than you realize. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering her words. I remember what you told me on Vega 7, that you weren't sure whether the crisis had made you better or worse. I remember. I think I have an answer now. It made you different, and different isn't inherently good or bad. But what you did with that difference, how you used the things you learned to survive and to help others, that made it good. That's what we're trying to do with the recovery program. Take the hard lessons and turn them into something that helps everyone. Helena smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. That sounds like wisdom, Commander. Director now. Apparently, I got promoted while I wasn't paying attention. You deserved it. Helena rose from her chair. Now come. There's a celebration happening and you should be part of it. You've earned that much at least. Marcus looked at his desk, at the mountains of work still waiting for him. Then he looked at Helena, at the woman who had survived 47 years of isolation and emerged with her humanity intact. She was right. Some things were more important than work. All right, he said, but only for an hour. That's what they all say. The celebration was held in the main hall of the United Earth Parliament building, a vast space filled with representatives from every human colony and delegation from dozens of alien species. The Velnoxi were there, observing with their characteristic detachment. The Meridani were more engaged, their representatives moving through the crowd and asking questions about human resilience. Other species, some that Marcus had never encountered, watched the proceedings with varying degrees of interest. Director Amara Obi gave the opening speech, honoring the survivors of the recovered colonies and the teams that had found them. She spoke of determination and hope, of the refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. She spoke of the future, of the continued expansion of human presence in the galaxy, and of the commitment to ensure that no colony would ever be abandoned again. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause, and Marcus found himself swept up in a crowd of well-wishers and curious observers. People wanted to shake his hand, to thank him for his work, to ask questions about the missions he had led. He answered as best he could, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the attention. Eventually, he managed to extract himself from the crowd and find a quiet corner where he could observe without being observed. From there, he watched the celebration continue, seeing the hope and pride on the faces of the attendees. This was what they had built. Not just the colonies, not just the technology, but this sense of connection, of belonging, of being part of something larger than themselves. The Velnoxi thought it was inefficient. The universe might prove it unsustainable, but for now, in this moment, it was real. Helena found him again, moving through the crowd with the ease of someone who had spent her life leading people. Still hiding. Still working, just doing it from a different location. She laughed, a sound that carried decades of experience and hard-won joy. You remind me of my mother. She could never just enjoy a moment either, always thinking about the next challenge, the next problem to solve. Was she right to do that? Maybe, or maybe she missed out on some of the best parts of life by focusing too much on the future. Helena took his arm, steering him back toward the celebration. There's a balance, Marcus, between working for tomorrow and living for today. You've spent your whole career working for tomorrow. Tonight, try living for today, just for a little while. Marcus let himself be led, let himself be drawn into the warmth and noise of the celebration. Around him, humans and aliens mingled, discussing the future of galactic civilization. Above them, the stars shone through the Parliament's transparent dome, distant and cold but no longer quite so empty. Out there somewhere, more colonies waited to be found. More survivors waited to be rescued. More miracles waited to be discovered. But that was tomorrow's work. Tonight, he would celebrate what they had already accomplished. The determination that had carried humanity to the stars, that had kept colonists alive through decades of isolation, that had driven recovery teams across the galaxy to find their lost brothers and sisters. That determination had created something remarkable. It had restored civilization's honor. And it was only the beginning.